It was the night Teddy Pendergrass had everything, and lost it all in 47 seconds. By March of 1982, Teddy Pendergrass wasn't just a singer. He was a phenomenon. 5 consecutive platinum albums, sold-out concerts where women threw their room keys onto the stage, a voice so powerful, so intimate, that people who heard it for the first time couldn't believe one man was capable of producing that sound. He was 32 years old at the absolute peak of his powers, and the music industry was watching to see just how far he would go. The answer, as it turned out, was nowhere. But that's not really the whole story, because what happened after that night, what Teddy Pendergrass did with the wreckage of everything he had built, is a story that says more about who he really was than any platinum album ever could. Teddy Pendergrass was born on March 26, 1950, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, raised by his mother Ida in the kind of poverty that doesn't leave you, the kind that lives in your bones long after you've escaped it. His father was largely absent. His neighborhood was rough, but Teddy had something that no neighborhood could take away. Even as a child, people noticed it. His voice, raw, enormous, somehow both delicate and overwhelming, was the kind of instrument that stopped conversations. He began singing in church at the age of 2. By the time he was a teenager, he was performing regularly, and the people who heard him were already running out of words to describe what they were witnessing. He became the drummer for Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes in the late 1960s, which was not where anyone expected his story to go. But when the group's lead singer left, Teddy stepped forward, and the moment he opened his mouth in that new role, everyone in the room understood that something had shifted permanently. Songs like If You Don't Know Me By Now and Wake Up Everybody reached millions of people and helped define what soul music sounded like in that decade. But it was Teddy's voice, not the songs, not the arrangements, that people came back for. By 1976, he had gone solo. And what happened next was something the music industry rarely sees. His first 5 solo albums all went platinum. He became the first solo artist in history to achieve 5 consecutive platinum albums. He sold out arenas across the country. His concerts became events, wild, emotional, theatrical experiences where the audience felt like they were part of something sacred and slightly dangerous at the same time. Women screamed. Grown men who had never cried at a concert found themselves unable to explain the tears running down their faces. Teddy Pendergrass had the ability to make every person in an audience feel like he was singing directly to them. This is rare. This is the thing that separates performers from artists and artists from legends. By 1982, he was a legend, and he was only 32 years old. That Thursday evening in March, Teddy had finished a recording session at his home studio outside Philadelphia. By all accounts, he was in a good mood, laughing with his team, talking about upcoming tour dates, making plans the way a man does when he believes the future is unlimited. The session had gone well. There was new music taking shape, and he was excited about it. The people who were there that evening later said he seemed lighter than he had in months. Around 11 p.m., he got into his silver Rolls-Royce Silver Spirit. A companion was with him, someone whose presence in that car would later become one of the most discussed details of the entire story. The roads outside Philadelphia were quiet. The night was cold and clear. There was no rain, no ice, no obvious reason for what was about to happen. Lincoln Drive is a winding tree-lined road that cuts through the Wissahickon Valley in northwest Philadelphia. It's a beautiful road during the day. At night, it's darker than it looks, and the curves come faster than you expect. What occurred next took less than a minute. The Rolls-Royce drifted toward the edge of the road. Teddy overcorrected. The car struck a guardrail, tore through it, and slammed into 2 trees with a force that crumpled the front of the vehicle like paper. First responders who arrived at the scene said they didn't expect anyone to survive. The car was barely recognizable as a car anymore. They were half right. Teddy's companion that night walked away from the crash with minor injuries. Teddy did not walk away at all. The companion's identity quickly became the dominant story in the days that followed. Not the accident itself, not Teddy's condition, but who had been in the car with him. Tanika Watson was a transgender woman, and in 1982, in a media landscape that had no interest in nuance or sensitivity, her presence in that car was treated as a scandal. Tabloids ran with it immediately. Radio hosts talked about it, and while all of this was happening, Teddy was fighting for his life in a hospital bed. His family found out the same way the public did, through the newspapers. People close to the family described those early days as almost unbearable, not just because of Teddy's condition, but because of the relentless media attention focused on the wrong things. That was a cruelty on top of a cruelty, one person close to the family said years later. The man was paralyzed, and people were more interested in who he was with than whether he was going to live. Teddy was airlifted to Thomas Jefferson University Hospital in Philadelphia, where surgeons worked through the night to stabilize him. The diagnosis, when it finally came, was devastating. An incomplete cervical spinal cord injury at the C5-C6 level. He would survive, but he would never walk again. And in those early weeks, no one was certain he would ever sing again either. He was 32 years old. He lay in that hospital room and stared at the ceiling, and the people around him say he didn't speak much in those first weeks. Teddy Pendergrass had always filled rooms, with his voice, his laughter, his presence. To see him quiet and still was unlike anything his family had ever witnessed. What do you say when everything you built your life around is gone in less than a minute? There are no words for that. There is only the ceiling and the silence and the slow, terrible process of figuring out what comes next. What the medical team didn't fully account for was who Teddy Pendergrass was when no one was watching. The public Teddy was the performer, the voice, the phenomenon. But underneath all of that was the kid from South Philadelphia who had clawed his way out of poverty with nothing but raw talent and a refusal to accept the limitations the world tried to place on him. That kid was still in there, and that kid was not going to lie in a hospital room and give up. His mother, Ida Pendergrass, was there every day. She had raised him alone through conditions that would have broken many people, and she had watched him transform himself through sheer will into something extraordinary. She sat beside his bed every single day and refused, absolutely refused, to treat him like someone who was finished. "Baby," she told him one night when the ward was quiet, "your voice is still in there. They can't take what God gave you." Teddy didn't respond that night, but the nurses noted that something shifted after that conversation. He stopped staring at the ceiling. He started looking at the door instead, like he was planning something, like he was beginning the long process of figuring out how to walk through it again, even if walking was no longer something his body could do. Rehabilitation was brutal in a way that is difficult to describe. It's not dramatic the way movies portray physical recovery. It's slow and painful and repetitive and demoralizing, and on most days, the progress is so incremental, it doesn't feel like progress at all. Teddy worked with therapists for hours each day, relearning the basic mechanics of existence, how to breathe differently, how to use his hands in limited ways, how to navigate a world that had been built for people whose bodies worked in ways his no longer did. The music industry went quiet. Calls stopped coming. The machine that had been built around Teddy Pendergrass began to quietly redirect its attention elsewhere. There were other artists. There were other voices. This is what fame does when the product it was built around changes. It moves on and leaves behind whatever it no longer needs. But in his hospital room, something else was happening. Teddy was singing, quietly at first, barely above a whisper, testing the new mechanics of his breathing, feeling out what had survived. The diaphragm injury had changed things. The way air moved through his body was different now. This would have ended most singing careers permanently. But Teddy's voice was not most voices. He sang quietly in his hospital room, testing and listening and adjusting. Then a little stronger, then stronger still. And what he found in those quiet hours when the ward was dark was that the voice hadn't gone anywhere. It was still there, changed perhaps, shaped by everything that had happened to the body that housed it, but still unmistakably the voice of Teddy Pendergrass. In late 1982, 8 months after the accident, Teddy released new music. The industry expected sympathy. Critics prepared careful, gentle reviews, the kind you write when you don't want to be cruel about diminished talent. What they got instead was a reminder. The voice on that record wasn't the voice of a man performing through pain. It was the voice of a man who had gone somewhere most people never go and come back with something new to say. There was a depth to it that hadn't been there before, not because the accident had improved his vocal instrument, but because the man behind the voice had been changed in ways that the voice now reflected. Critics who had prepared their careful reviews found themselves writing something entirely different. The talent hadn't diminished. If anything, it had found new dimensions. The years that followed were not easy. There were setbacks and frustrations and moments when the gap between who Teddy had been before March 18th and who he was now felt impossibly wide. There were industry relationships that never recovered. There were opportunities that never came. But there was also music. 6 studio albums recorded after the accident, each one carrying the weight of everything he had survived, and the refusal to let that weight crush him. There were concerts, too, different from before, necessarily, because everything was different now. Teddy performed from his wheelchair, and the audiences who came discovered something unexpected, that the physical stillness somehow concentrated everything into the voice, and the voice was more powerful than ever. People who saw him perform after the accident said it was unlike anything they had experienced. Watching a man sit completely still and produce a sound of that magnitude was a different kind of extraordinary, quieter than before, and, in its own way, more profound. Years after the accident, when he had rebuilt his life and his career and his understanding of himself, Teddy was asked what he remembered about the night on Lincoln Drive. He was quiet for a long moment. "I remember the trees," he said finally. "I remember thinking, this is it, and then I remember waking up and my mother was holding my hand and I thought, okay, there's still something left to do." He never elaborated on what that something was, but the music he made in the years that followed suggested he had figured it out. Teddy Pendergrass died on January 13, 2010, from respiratory failure following surgery. He was 59 years old. He had spent 28 years in a wheelchair. He had released 6 studio albums after the accident. He had performed again, seated but performing, in front of audiences who came from across the country to hear a voice they had never been able to forget. At his funeral in Philadelphia, the church was full of people who had never met him but felt they had lost someone close. That's what his voice had always done. From the church in South Philadelphia, where he first sang at the age of 2, to the arenas where thousands screamed his name, to the hospital room where he sang quietly in the dark to find out what was still there. It made strangers feel less alone. We talk about March 18, 1982, as the night. Teddy Pendergrass lost everything. And in a literal sense, that's true. He lost the use of his legs. He lost the career he had imagined. He lost the future he had been planning so confidently that evening at the studio. But the people who knew him best tell a different story about that night. Not a story that minimizes what was lost, but a story that takes the full measure of what happened, which includes not just the loss, but what came after it. They say it was the night Teddy Pendergrass found out who he really was. Not the image, not the phenomenon, not the 5 platinum albums, just a man from South Philadelphia with a voice that God gave him and that no accident could take, and something left to say. And if you listen to the music he made after that night, you might start to think that the crash didn't take anything from him that was truly his. The things that were really his, the voice, the will, the refusal to be finished, those things survived. Those things grew stronger in the years that followed, the way certain things do when they've been tested and found to be unbreakable. The crash changed what he was singing about. It gave the voice new depths and the songs new weight. It turned a great performer into something rarer, an artist whose work carried the full truth of a human life, including the parts that are hardest to look at. That is the real story of March 18, 1982. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. Have you ever heard a Teddy Pendergrass song that stayed with you? Tell us which one, and don't forget to ring the notification bell for more stories about the voices that shaped our world.